Okay, so I would also like to add to Savannah's introduction of me, the fact that, well, I was a Wikipedia Fellow last year, and I was working on the articles devoted to digital composition, digital rhetoric, digital writing, and I was editing those articles, I was contributing to them, but my main task was translating those articles from English into Russian and moving those articles to Russian Wikipedia. So a lot what I'm going to talk about today would be connected with my experience of doing that, being multilingual speaker. So today, my presentation is multilingual writers in digital space. And it's not a coincidence that I've chosen this topic. Being a multilingual speaker, researcher, student, writer, and instructor, I've had a lot of experience with multilingual literacy and digital literacy as well. Well, you can tell by my accent that I'm not a native English speaker, and I understand how challenging it might be for multilingual English second learners to embrace different writing cultures of other languages. Knowing that, I advocate for digital diversity and equity because multilinguals need different modes to express themselves and transfer their messages. And although my dissertation focuses on multilingual writers in digital space, today I decided to cover a broader topic of digital space and the roles of multilinguals in it. So here you can see on the left the QR code for the presentation materials. If you would like to look at this presentation later, or if you are interested in bibliography, I put all the sources together, and Savannah created a folder so you can access it with a QR code. And on the right, if you're interested in my work and my research in general, you can add me on Facebook, which I use for academic and professional purposes. So let's get started on the presentation itself. Today, I'm going to cover three main themes. First, I will focus on multilingual writers and explain the necessity to encourage the use of their background experiences. Then I would move to the roles of multilinguals on Wikipedia, which is a great tool for intercultural education. And finally, I will talk about digital equity and diversity, arguing for digital access to information for everyone. Before we actually start talking about the mentioned topics, I would like to share the general information of who multilinguals are and how they're defined. So multilinguals are people who use more than one language in their everyday lives. If we look at the statistics, almost half of the population is multilingual. And the most common languages are Chinese, Spanish, and French, besides English, of course. There are about 20% of multilingual people in the United States, and they speak Spanish, Japanese, Korean, or French as additional languages. And we all know that writing is complicated, and multilingual writing is even more complicated due to the language contexts and discourses involved in it. So here I would like to have a look how educators can help students to make their writing meaningful and provide space for their needs. So the first quote says that writing is rhetorical negotiation for achieving social meaning and functions. In other words, we don't write only to construct a rule-governed text. We want a meaningful writing to perform important social acts. We want communication. We write to achieve specific interests, represent our preferred values, identities, and fulfill our diverse needs. So this is all what multilingual students need. The second is texts are representational. We cannot avoid displaying our identities and values in the texts that we write. So educators should encourage students to reflect on their interests in writing, the values they need to motivate their rhetoric choices, and identities constructed by their texts. Multilingual students should not treat rules as given or predefined for specific texts or contexts. They should know that texts and discourses, they can be changeable. Students can engage critically in the act of changing rules and conventions, and they can make them suitable for their own interests, values, and identities. So, in other words, if we, as educators, focus on what students really need to say instead of what they have to say, that would give us a chance to make them not only better writers, but critical writers as well. The next is treating the first language and culture as a resource, not a problem. Diverse literacy traditions should be accommodated rather than kept divided and separate. Invoking differences helps students to find a strategic entry point into English language. And oral resources are also very important for this purpose, and especially for written communication, because oral resources and discourses, they provide useful resource for narrative and voice for students from multilingual backgrounds. They also help deconstruct the values behind literate traditions and expand the communicative potential of writing. And speaking about inclusive classroom communities, when we view literacy as a social act and classroom as learning communities, we find opportunities for students to work together. These practices form different relationships. So for example, when in the classroom we assign such activities as writing postcards or describe their favorite songs or create blog posts. So instead of two formal and constructed tasks, which require to work individually, we can ask students to work collaboratively and learn from each other. So inclusive classrooms actually draw upon literacy and social practices from students' lives. So something that they can experience in real life or already experienced. And they can use their home language while acquiring a new one. Now let's have a look how digital space provides multilingual writers with enormous possibilities comparing to a regular classroom. So first of all, it helps to construct their digital identity. The brightest example would be social media, where multilinguals write posts in different languages. Or if you have multilingual friends on Facebook, you can see that someone is posting comment in one language and the person responds in another language, or even the posts can be in different languages. So they use their languages simultaneously, or they switch between them. Secondly, digital space enhances literacy practices, since it provides opportunities to use new technologies and digital tools. For instance, blog posts, which teach students how to write texts for a global audience rather than for an instructor and their classmates, and also focusing on different style of writing, which is less formal than academic classroom requires. And even if these posts are assigned by a professor, the language students use, the language that students need would be different from the language that they would use while writing their essays. And finally, digital space highlights students' voice, personalizing students' learning where they can be who they are. They can use all their linguistic repertoires, and they can lean on their background experiences. Speaking about multilinguals on Wikipedia specifically, there are various areas how they can contribute to global understanding and intercultural communication. First is cultural context. Wikipedia is a great space for multilinguals to share their values and language norms. Then, editing behavior. Multilinguals can lean on their practices, and they also can learn from each other. They can know about different rules that should be applied to various Wikipedia spaces. So for instance, when I was moving my articles from English Wikipedia to Russian Wikipedia, I found out a lot of rules that were not accepted in Russian Wikipedia because they just could not be applied. So I am sure that this would be the case for many countries where the rules of editing would be different. And with the help of multilingual learners, we could learn all those rules. Thirdly, different background education, which influences multilinguals' rhetorical choices and provokes writing in certain linguistic contexts. Fourth point is content. Depending on the country, the content of Wikipedia would vary greatly. The reason for this that people have different interests in different countries, and multilinguals in this case, they contribute to the global knowledge by moving articles from one space into another. Then the language itself, speaking multiple languages, provides different views on the same article and contributes to global connectivity as a result. And all these factors that I mentioned, they lead eventually to knowledge equity. And since I mentioned knowledge equity, let's talk about digital equity and inclusion. First, we need to provide access to hardware and connectivity. This would resolve the issue of digitally excluded people within and across countries. It might happen due to various reasons, starting from financial instability to the lack of the internet access in certain areas of different countries. Secondly, background education and access to knowledge contribute to educational and digital equity. Multilingual students normally have different levels of digital and literacy skills since they might come from different countries. And educational institutions in every country need to make sure that students have access to education on digital technology and best practices to maintain the equity of knowledge on digital and literacy skills. And lastly, connected to the previous ones, availability of technical and social support provided by skillful educators who know about communication technologies and digital literacy and can share this information with students. So while preparing this presentation, I was working with I was looking at the outstanding scholars' works who write about these topics, namely Kanagaraja, who focuses on multilingual writers and has written a lot about them. Resta and Laferriere, who write about digital equity, and the article Multilingual Wikipedia by Vrandesik, which inspired my presentation today. I would also like to share some common myths about multilingual people. So the first and the most common one is that if you don't learn a language before a certain age, you will never be able to. Obviously, at a certain age, it is easier for some people to acquire a new language, but it doesn't mean that it is impossible to do it at any other age. Of course, someone who did not learn a language in their childhood would not get the same knowledge as those who started learning the language in their adulthood, for example. So for me, I started learning French when I was 20. So obviously, I don't know a lot about, French children's books or cartoons, but I still can be fluent in French without that particular knowledge. Another myth is that if you aren't equally fluent in all languages, you aren't truly multilingual. So multilingualism is not about the fluency, but rather about the use of language a person knows. So for example, someone who has moved to a different country with a low level of language still would be able to use some basic words and phrases in their daily life, which would eventually replace their native vocabulary for certain things. And finally, being exposed to multiple languages may cause language disorder. So this myth is generally about children, and it actually contradicts the first myth in some ways, but there is a certain number of research arguing that children growing up in multilingual families, they actually have good literacy and oral skills, and also they use various linguistic structures in their writing. Summarizing everything that I have been talking in this presentation, the presence of multilinguals in digital space first fosters intercultural understanding and education by bringing together their different educational backgrounds and their opportunity to share their knowledge. Also, it bridges both the digital and cultural divides by emerging into various cultures. And finally, it enlarges intercultural connections and communications, enabling to share the information and knowledge. And all of this lead to digital equity and inclusion as a result. And these are some references that I used. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're interested to look at the bibliography, it is all in the folder that Savannah created for this presentation. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm very excited to hear your questions if you have any.